Welcome to a podcast by opentheword.org, where we discuss a bit of Bible, a bit of life, and a bit of politics.
Hi, my name is Dean Smith. Ever since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, he has been threatening to use nuclear weapons if the West tries to intervene in this conflict. In a statement released on Thursday, February 24th, 2022, Putin warned that any intervention, and I quote, will lead to such serious consequences that you have never encountered in your history, unquote. What else could Putin be referring to but nuclear war? And then to drive that point home, a few days later, a senior Russian newscaster, Dmitry Kiselyov, speaking on the country's state TV, said that Russia has submarines with over 500 nuclear warheads that would, and I quote, guarantee the destruction of the USA and all other NATO countries, unquote. Then in a follow-up article, a British newspaper, the Daily Mail, reported that Russia has over 4,000 nuclear warheads in its arsenal. The Daily Mail also reported that on March 2nd, 2 Russian military jets briefly entered Swedish airspace. Though the 2 Sukhoi 24s were quickly intercepted by the Swedish Air Force and forced out, photographs of the 2 Russian jets revealed they were actually armed with nuclear warheads. And since then, there have been several warnings of the possibility of nuclear war in Europe. We have just come through a pandemic, and now the world is going crazy. Now, here is the strange thing. One of the major themes of the Bible is prophecy that speaks of the coming day of the Lord, which is referring to the second coming of Christ. The day of the Lord would be marked by several catastrophic events, asteroid strikes, earthquakes, plagues, and volcanic explosions, all referred to in the Bible. But some have wondered, does the Bible speak of nuclear war in the end times? Now, the biggest problem that we have with interpreting these end-time prophecies is that many of these individuals, such as the prophet Zechariah and the apostle John, were having visions. In other words, they were seeing events as they were taking place hundreds of years in the future. And this required them to find words in their non-technological vocabulary to describe what they were actually seeing. So if they were witnessing nuclear war or a nuclear explosion, how would they describe it when the most advanced weapons of their day was a bow and arrow? In fact, I believe there are several prophecies that may hint at possible nuclear war, and I want to look at just 2 of them. Now, it takes a bit of reading between the lines to interpret what they were saying in the context of their ancient cultures. First, let's start with Zechariah's plague prophecy, and we read, "And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples that wage war against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they are still standing on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths." Zechariah chapter 14, verse 12. In his vision, the prophet saw people's flesh and eyes and tongues rotting and falling off while they were still standing. It would happen so fast that they would not even have the chance to fall down. Now, there was nothing in their day that came even close to that. So if he was seeing the after effects of a nuclear explosion, how would Zechariah describe it? Well, the prophet used the only word in his vocabulary that even came close: plague. This is because leprosy was the only thing in their ancient culture that resulted in people's flesh rotting and body parts literally falling off. Leprosy was also the most terrifying disease of that day, so it also emphasized the horror of what Zechariah was witnessing. The significant difference in Zechariah's vision is that it was instantaneous. These people were still standing as their flesh literally fell off their bodies. Was he seeing the after effects of a nuclear blast? The second passage I want to describe is the Apostle John's description of wormwood. And we read, "The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter." Revelation chapter 8, verses 10 to 11. In his vision of the end times, the Apostle John saw a star falling from heaven that he called wormwood. So if John was seeing a nuclear attack, how would he describe a intercontinental ballistic missile that leaves the Earth's atmosphere before returning in a fiery blaze and launching its nuclear payload? Well, first, John calls it a star. It was the only word in his first century vocabulary that fit the description of a fiery blaze falling from high in the heaven onto earth. But this star was different. It looked like a torch. This meant it was long and thin, perhaps even missile-like. Was John seeing a ballistic missile? But then John adds this strange description. He calls this star wormwood. Wormwood was a bitter-tasting plant that the ancients used oddly, both for medicinal purposes, such as dealing with parasites, and in larger quantities as a poison. But then John noticed that a very strange thing happened. When this elongated star that looked like a torch called wormwood hit the earth, he said the earth became wormwood. The wormwood torch transferred its wormwood poison to the ground, causing people to die. Remembering that John was simply trying to explain what he's seeing with his limited first century vocabulary, was John describing the radiation contamination that follows a nuclear explosion. And maybe John's choice of descriptive words is just a coincidence, because similar to wormwood, radiation can be used both medically to cure cancer and also to kill. As we study these ancient end-time prophecies, we need to take a closer look and ask ourselves, what are they really trying to describe? Now, maybe you don't agree with me in my interpretation, and that is completely fine. That's just my opinion. But these aren't the only verses that suggest a nuclear war could be part of the apocalyptic end times.
Thanks again for joining us on our podcast. Please check out our website at opentheword.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to receive notifications of future broadcasts. As well, please take a moment to provide a rating and even a review. Thanks again for listening.